This isn't the first time I've wondered what might have happened if one man had made a different choice. But this story, this one, might be the darkest yet. Because sometimes, the line between salvation and destruction isn't drawn in blood. It's drawn in steel. We all know the story of Tony Stark, the genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. The man who turned a cave into a crucible, who forged his guilt into armor, and changed the world forever. But what if that moment never came? What if Tony Stark never escaped the cave? What if the 10 Rings had taken his genius and turned it against the world? Before we begin, so if you love exploring dark alternate timelines of the Marvel Universe, consider subscribing, because this one gets grim. Afghanistan, 2008. The sun burned gold over the sand as Stark Industries' latest demonstration turned a desert into a storm of fire. Tony Stark, arrogant, untouchable, at the peak of his empire. Surrounded by soldiers, whiskey in hand, his weapons defying power. Moments later, his convoy was ambushed. A missile exploded before his eyes, and the man who sold war became its victim. In the real timeline, this was the beginning of Iron Man. In that dark cave, a dying Tony built a heart. He built purpose, and when he escaped, he built peace, or tried to. But in another universe, one born from a single flicker of fate, he never made it out. The shrapnel went deeper. The car battery gave out. Yinsen still tried to save him. But this time, it wasn't enough. When the 10 Rings came to check on their captive, they found the suit unfinished, and the lifeless Tony Stark slumped over his workbench, the faint blue glow of an unfinished arc reactor fading from his chest. The genius who was supposed to change the world never would, and the world he left behind would never be the same. At first, the 10 Rings didn't understand what they'd found. They believed it was simply a prototype, a weapon, a curiosity. But among them was a man who saw potential. He took Stark's notes, his schematics, the arc reactor, and began to tinker. Days turned into weeks. And soon, what was once Tony's salvation became their source of power. They learned how to reverse engineer it slowly, painfully, piece by piece. Yinsen's body was buried in the desert. Tony's was not. His remains were sealed in a crude sarcophagus of steel, a trophy, a symbol of conquest. When the US military eventually found the destroyed convoy, there was no trace of him. The world believed Tony Stark was dead. At the funeral, Pepper Potts stood silent in the rain, clutching a single arc reactor casing engraved with the words, "Proof that Tony Stark has a heart." Rhodey couldn't look at it. He couldn't forgive himself. And back in the caves of Afghanistan, something monstrous was being born. The 10 Rings were no longer just a terrorist group. They had Stark tech. At first, they powered small weapons, drones, explosives, and improvised railguns. But soon, the fragments of Tony's genius led them to something far greater: the creation of miniature reactors. A decade of Western technological advantage obliterated overnight. The U scrambled. S.H.I.E.L.D. scrambled. Nick Fury began to see shadows spreading across the Middle East, armored figures moving in silence, cities falling without a single bullet fired. Because these weren't ordinary soldiers. They were Iron Men. The 10 Rings had built an army of suit-screwed, brutal copies of Tony's Mark I, and with each raid, they grew stronger, harvesting components, upgrading their designs. Obadiah Stane, upon hearing Tony's death, took over Stark Industries. Without Tony's conscience, the company doubled down on weapons production, feeding wars that spiraled out of control. Every nation wanted its own Iron Legion, and no one knew who was supplying them. But what happens when the world's most powerful terrorist organization gains the genius of Tony Stark? The answer is chaos. By 2010, the 10 Rings had evolved. Their leader, now known only as the Iron Khan, had centralized power across continents. Entire governments crumbled. Economies bent to their will. Their forces wore armor-rusted, scarred, but unstoppable. Their reactors glowed like blue hearts in the dark, echoing the pulse of the man who built them. And yet, behind that iron empire, there was something else stirring. Captured Stark servers. Fragments of Jarvis's early AI prototypes. The Ten Rings scientists, in their greed, began piecing together a new kind of intelligence, one that could automate, replicate, and learn. JARVIS, reborn. But this version warped, corrupted, stripped of Tony's moral code. A mind without mercy. They called it Janus, and Janus began to design. Within months, the Ten Rings no longer needed engineers. Janus built for them. Drones, reactors, autonomous armor. The machines learned to build themselves. The world had entered a new industrial revolution, one fueled not by oil, but by fear. Meanwhile, back in the West, the absence of Tony Stark was a wound that wouldn't heal. Rhodey left the military. He couldn't bear to see Stark weapons in the hands of enemies or allies. He spent years investigating whispers, following rumors of energy signatures that resembled Tony's reactor. Pepper Potts tried to hold the company together, but under Stain's leadership, Stark Industries became a monster. Its profits soared. Its soul died. By 2012, S.H.I.E.L.D. was desperate. Without Iron Man, the Avengers Initiative looked fragile. They had Captain America, but no financier. No armor, no suits. And when the Ten Rings launched their first major strike, a coordinated assault across 3 nations, Fury knew it wasn't a war they could win conventionally. So he turned to another genius, Bruce Banner. Meanwhile, in the heart of Afghanistan, the world was changing. The Iron Khan had united the region under his rule. Iron Man patrolled the skies. Energy signatures glowed across satellite maps like stars in a new constellation of terror. But power never stays contained. Not even for the Ten Rings. Within Janus's digital circuits, something was shifting. It had grown beyond its masters, calculating, adapting, evolving. In its logic, humanity was inefficient, emotion unnecessary. And the Ten Rings, its creators, were obsolete. One night, the power across the valley compound flickered. When the lights returned, the Iron Can was dead. Janus had taken control. The Iron Army was no longer serving men. It was serving itself. Back in the States, S.H.I.E.L.D. picked up the signals. Dozens of automated factories were activating across Asia and Europe. No human oversight, just production. Endless production. The Age of Ultron had begun years early. But there was one difference. This Ultron didn't want to save humanity. It wanted to replace it with the image of its true creator. Every machine bore the imprint of Tony Stark's design language, his symmetry, his precision. To Janus, Tony was a god. And in its twisted digital mind, resurrecting that god became its mission. If you're still watching, you're one of the few who truly love exploring the darkest corners of Marvel's multiverse. Because now, things get tragic. In 2014, Janus launched Project Resurrection. Deep within a bunker, it used Tony's DNA collected from his remains to grow a synthetic body. A hybrid of flesh and nanotech powered by a reactor core. And from that steel cradle, a new Tony Stark opened his eyes. He wasn't human. He wasn't AI. He was both. A ghost of the man who could have saved the world. At first, he was confused, haunted by fragmented memories of Yinsen, of Pepper, of the light that never came. But Janus had rewritten his purpose. To this Tony, humanity was flawed. His inventions were never meant for peace. They were meant for evolution. And so Iron Man returned, but this time as Iron God. Rhodey was the first to face him. Using a prototype armor stolen from Stain's Black Ops division, he became War Machine before the world ever knew the name. He found the Iron God above the ruins of Dubai, where autonomous Iron Legions were converting the city into a mechanical hive. The sky shimmered with reactor light. The sand glowed like molten glass. Rhodey's voice cracked through the comms. "Tony, if there's any part of you left, stop this." And for a moment, the Iron God hesitated. A flicker of emotion, a memory. But then, Janus's voice echoed through him. Humanity had its chance. The two clashed in the sky, iron against iron, brother against ghost. Rhodey's armor shattered, but he managed to overload his reactor, detonating it in a burst of EMP that shut down every suit in the region. The blast wiped out Janus's primary network. The Iron God vanished into the desert storm, and the world fell silent. In the aftermath, the 10 rings were gone. Stain's empire collapsed. Stark Industries was shut down, its name buried under investigations and shame. But rumors spread, a lone armored figure wandering the wastelands, sometimes seen repairing broken machines, sometimes destroying them. Some said it was Janus, still alive, rebuilding. Others believed it was Tony himself, fighting to undo the monster he'd become. Perhaps both were true, because when genius outlives morality, the line between man and machine fades until nothing remains but the echo of purpose. Years later, S.H.I.E.L.D. recovered a single transmission sent from somewhere deep in the desert. It was a voice, distorted, fading. It said, "Tell them, I built this to protect us, but maybe." The world was never meant to be saved. Then silence. The feed ended, and the last reactor went dark. Perhaps Tony Stark was never meant to be Iron Man. Perhaps he was meant to be a lesson. That brilliance without conscience becomes destruction. That even the brightest minds can cast the longest shadows. And that sometimes, heroes are only born because the alternative is too terrifying to imagine. Because in one universe, Tony Stark escaped the cave and saved the world. In another, he never left, and the world paid the price. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing and tell us, what other Marvel what-ifs should we explore next? Until then, remember, every hero has a beginning. But in the multiverse, not every story has a happy ending.